All right, everyone, here we go with section 5.6, day 1. This section we discover what the quadratic formula is. Some of you probably heard of this or remember this from Algebra 1, but we go into it with a little more depth than we do in Algebra 1 now that we are in Algebra 2. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So you'll note that a, b, and c are real numbers, and a cannot equal 0. A can't be 0 because it's in the denominator, and we can't have a denominator equal 0 in a fraction. So we're going to use the quadratic formula to solve these equations. So in number 1, to do the quadratic formula, we have to make the equation equal 0. Okay, so it has to look like this. So if you look at number 1, 3x squared plus 8x minus 35 equals 0. This equation does equal 0, so we are all set to go. So in this one, a equals 3, b equals 8, and c equals negative 35. So we have a, b, and c. And now we got to use our equation, so I'll scroll up so you can see it. So x equals negative b. Negative b is the opposite of b, so the opposite of 8 is negative 8. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, so it's 8 squared, minus 4 times a times c. So 8 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 35. On the bottom, it's 2 times a, so 2 times 3. So negative b is negative 8 plus or minus the square root. 8 squared is 64. 4 times 3 times negative 35. 4 times 3 is 12. And 12 times negative 35 is negative 420. So when you have a negative and a negative, so minus negative, it's plus positive. All divided by 2 times 3 is 6. So now we get x equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 484, all divided by 6. Right. If you take your calculator, the square root of 484 is 22. So we get x equals negative 8 plus 22 divided by 6, or x equals negative 8 minus 22 divided by 6. So when you simplify this, x equals 14 over 6, which is 7 over 3, or x equals negative 30 over 6, which is negative 5. So x is 7 over 3 or negative 5 for this one. In problem number 2, the issue with this one is that it doesn't equal 0. You see how we have 2m squared on one side and we have 2m minus 3 on the other? So we have to make it equal 0. So we have to cancel out the 2m by subtracting it. We're going to cancel out the plus 3 by adding it. So the 2m's cancel and the 3's cancel. So we have 2m squared minus 2m plus 3 equals 0. Okay, now we got to find a, b, and c. So a equals 2, b equals negative 2, and c equals 3. So we take those numbers and we put them in the equation. So the equation is x equals negative b. The opposite of b is the opposite of negative 2. And the opposite of a negative 2 is positive 2. So it's 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so it's negative 2 squared minus 4 times A, so 4 times 2, times C, all divided by 2 times A. So all divided by 2 times 2. So we end up with x equals 2 plus or minus negative 2 squared plus 4 times 2 times 3 is negative 20. And if you wonder where I got that from, negative 2 squared is 4. 4 times 2 times 3 is 24. And 4 minus 24 is negative 20. So it came from right here. When you figure that out in your calculator, you get negative 20. And it's all divided by 4. So now we have x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 20. And it's a negative and a square root, so we're going to take out an I. And 20 is 4 times 5. So again, I'm going to go off to the side. Square root of negative 20 is really negative 1 times 4 times 5. Negative 1 is I. Square root of 4 is 2. So that's where that I, and it's going to be times 2 times square root of 5. So this will equal 2 plus or minus 2I square root 5, all divided by 4. Okay, and we are almost there. If you look, there's 1, 2, 3 terms. Each of those terms can be divided by 2. If we divide 2 by 2, you get 1. So it's 1 plus or minus 1I times square root of 5, all divided by 4 divided by 2 is 2. So it's 1 plus or minus I square root 5 over 2. And we got 2 more of the same, so we'll just run through these quick. A equals 2, B equals negative 12, and C equals 18. So x equals negative b. The opposite of b would be the opposite of negative 12, which is positive 12, plus or minus the square root of negative 12 squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So again, this comes from our equation right here. Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac. That's where we get those numbers from. So now, negative b is 12. So it's 12 plus or minus the square root. If you take your calculator and you type in this stuff in your calculator, 12 squared is 144. So 144 minus 4 times 2 times 18 is going to end up being 0. And 2 times 2 is 4. So you end up with x equals 12 plus or minus 0 divided by 4. Because the square root of 0 is 0. So really we have x equals 12 plus 0 over 4. Or it's 12 minus 0 over 4. Now this is a very unique part because 12 plus 0 is the same as 12 minus 0. So either way, it's going to be 12 divided by 4. You see that both of these are going to give you 12 on top and 4 on the bottom. And 12 divided by 4 is 3. So in this case, there's only one answer. It comes out to x equals 3. And if you look above, up here we had 2 answers. And over here we had 2 answers. All right, that plus or minus in here means there's two different answers. All right, and then we have our last one, number 4. We have to make this equal 0. So we're going to minus x and add 5. So x squared minus x plus 5 equals 0. So in this one, a equals 1, b equals -1, and c equals 5. So when we solve this, x equals negative b would be positive 1 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So in the square root, -1 squared is 1, and 1 minus 4 times 1 times 5 is -19. And the bottom, 2 times 1 is 2. So remember that the square root of -19 is really the square root of -1 times the square root of positive 19, and the square root of -1 is I. So the answer is x equals 1 plus or minus I square root 19, all divided by 2. And in this problem, there's nothing that we can simplify, so we leave our answer like this. Right, so that's the quadratic formula. Find a, b, and c, and you substitute them into this formula, and then you simplify.